At first glance, this map of New York City looks like any ordinary map. You spot Broadway, Bowery, and other familiar streets that seem perfectly normal. But as you zoom in, you begin to notice something strange. Streets running diagonally, land jutting beyond the island's edge, and an overall layout that seems chaotic and confusing. This, however, is not a map of the city as it exists, but a plan. A bold and ambitious plan that was ultimately rejected in favor of the grid system we know today, a grid so perfectly organized that it has become iconic, worldwide celebrated even through events like Manhattan Hang, where the sun aligns perfectly with the straight streets of Manhattan, creating breathtaking views and hashtags on Instagram. But what many didn't realize is that the grid didn't become the plan simply because it was beautiful or made it easy to navigate. Instead, it was a product of deeper, practical reasons rooted in economics, property rights, and the explosive growth pressures faced by the city in the early 19th century, reflecting a vision of urban development driven by efficiency, predictability, and the needs of an emerging metropolis. To understand this, it helps to look back at other cities with grid plans and the ideals behind them, because Manhattan's grid wasn't born in a vacuum. It was part of a larger conversation about city planning that dates back centuries. For example, William Penn's Philadelphia, designed in 1681, was a utopian vision where the grid represented more than just streets. It was an expression of Quaker morality and values, with right angles representing not only geometric order, but moral order, preserving common spaces and gardens to foster community and a sense of openness reminiscent of a country town. Philadelphia's grid was designed to promote social ideals as much as physical order. Then there was Savannah, Georgia, designed in 1733 under the Oglethorpe Plan, which reflected Enlightenment ideas about balance and moderation. Savannah's grid incorporated common squares, green spaces for gathering, and deliberately limited the city's expansion, prioritizing livability and community over sheer growth. And moving into the late 18th century, Pierre L'Enfant's 1791 plan for Washington, D.C., was even more ambitious, blending a strict grid with grand diagonal avenues, circles, and monumental squares representing the fledgling United States and its original states, creating a city plan that was both functional and symbolic. But New York was never quite as idealistic or symbolic. When we look back to maps from 1767 and 1776, what we see is a chaotic patchwork of curved streets, irregular lots, and private ownership that led to constant change and disorder, the kind of confusion that makes navigating the city feel like a challenge even today in some parts. Early attempts to bring order, such as a planned large square belonging to the Delancey estate, were interrupted by history itself. The Delanceys sided with the British during the American Revolution, and their land was confiscated, wiping their square off the map and erasing a potential piece of early urban planning order. By the dawn of the 19th century, the urgency for order in New York was growing fast. Although exact population figures before 1800 are fuzzy, the trend was unmistakable. Explosive growth that more than doubled the population between 1770 and 1790. This rapid growth was accompanied by outbreaks of yellow fever that terrorized the city and the East Coast, increasing the urgency to redesign New York into a cleaner, more organized place. Against this backdrop, the city hired architect Joseph Mangan and surveyor Casimir Gork in 1797 to draft a plan showing New York not as it was, but as it should be. One that widened, narrow, crooked streets, and even added land along the waterfront, envisioning a graceful and expanded city. Yet, as visionary as their plan was, it was rejected for being too complex and slow to implement, as the city needed a faster, more practical solution to keep up with its growth. Then, in 1807, a new commission was created to devise a workable plan, one that reflected not only the city's current size, but projected a population greater than any place on the American continent at the time. This plan proposed a vast grid system stretching across settled and unsettled land, and the planners debated whether to include curved streets, circles, and stars, like those found in Washington, D.C., to add or to stick to simple right-angled streets and rectangular blocks. Ultimately, they chose simplicity and cost-effectiveness over aesthetics, reasoning that right-angled blocks made houses cheaper to build and easier to live in, and that a uniform grid allowed developers to predict property lines without confusion. This pragmatic choice was quintessentially New York. No fancy, no romantic visions, just efficient design to support rapid expansion and economic growth. This decision meant the city could grow faster, property could be sold and developed with fewer disputes, and the entire layout could be easily replicated as the city sprawled northward up Manhattan. The grid system is often celebrated today for its order, but that order was designed to serve practicality, a fact that landscape architect Frederick Law Olmsted lamented decades later. Olmsted, who designed Central Park and many of the city's public spaces, criticized the grid, saying that the city suffered graver misfortunes because of the rigidity of its streets and that a more thoughtful organic arrangement might have avoided many problems. Yet, in 1811, when the grid was adopted, the city's values were crystal clear. Build as much and as fast as possible. Efficiency and cheap construction were paramount. No matter how imperfect or the grid enabled the rapid urbanization that transformed New York into the economic and cultural giant it is today. Beyond just streets, this plan shaped New York's very culture, influencing how people interacted, how neighborhoods developed, and how commerce flowed. The grid became a symbol of New York's relentless drive to grow and innovate, and it continues to define the city's identity centuries later. So next time you walk Manhattan's streets, remember this. The seemingly simple lines you see are the product of fierce debates, competing visions, and pragmatic choices, made at a crucial moment when New York could either remain a chaotic colonial patchwork or become a global powerhouse. The grid wasn't designed for beauty. It was designed for survival, for opportunity, and for a city that never stops moving forward. It is a reminder that sometimes the most impactful urban design is not about elegance or artistry, but about grit, predictability, and the unstoppable human urge to build something bigger than ourselves. And that, in the end, is the story of Manhattan's grid, a plan born from necessity and ambition. That changed the course of history and still shapes how millions live and work today.